right, everyone, welcome to today's Skill Up Series event. My name's Emily Sprenger. I'm an academic learning specialist at National University. We're so excited to have Dr. Dia Talevi here today to go over the session, the First Amendment, what students need to know. And we absolutely want you to have conversation in the chat. And if you have questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A. If you would like to see the scrolling subtitles, you're able to hover over the bottom of your Zoom and select CC for show subtitles. If you need me at all, you can find me in the chat, but today I'm going to turn it over to our content expert, Dr. Dio Talevi.
Thank you, Emily. And hello, everyone. Good morning for those of you on the West Coast. For me, I'm on the East. I'm in Florida. So good afternoon to some of you as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a PowerPoint today. Questions are welcome. As Emily said, if you want to ask them in the chat, she'll monitor that for us. You can ask during the presentation or after. It doesn't matter. If something comes up, please ask, okay? So let me share my screen with you. And we can go underway from there. It's nice to have all of you here. So what we're going to talk about today, as Emily mentioned, is the First Amendment, what students need to know, and actually what everybody needs to know. I hope you get something out of this. A little bit about myself before we get underway. There be me. I am a professor at Florida Gulf Coast University as well as national. I've been at FGCU for 22 years, 32 years as a full-time academician. And a couple of weeks ago, I just celebrated my 40th anniversary as an attorney. I'm a lawyer in Massachusetts and in Florida. I was a former professional broadcaster from the late 70s to the 80s, and I was a news director, assistant news director, production director, staff announcer, and the like. I have developed 10 courses for the JFK School of Law here at National, and I am an adjunct online professor as well. So what are our goals today? Well, we have a few. First of all, to understand the development of our First Amendment rights, to appreciate the complexities affecting these constitutionally protected freedoms, realize, I hope you do by the end, or if you don't already, that the First Amendment laws change and they're constantly changing. They're challenged by new realities, global issues like COVID and emerging technologies. Apply constitutional, case, and statutory law. We're going to be mentioning all of those today to First Amendment related situations, and establish a foundation for debate in appreciating these constitutional rights, whether you're a teacher here, a business person, or a student, as I think probably all of us are students for life, right? In and out of the classroom. Now, in law, we have these fancy Latin terms and legalese, we call it. You've heard of it. Some caveats. Caveat means beware, right? Like caveat emptor, buyer beware. We cannot do it all today. This course is a course of the First Amendment that you could very easily take in a legal studies program, paralegal program in law school for an entire semester. In fact, con law, constitutional law, I took for 9 months in Let 1, which was my first year in law school. There were 3 years, Let 1, Let 2, and Let 3. We'll hit the high points today, though, so we'll cover a lot. We hope we learned something. I hope you enjoy it and have a few laughs along the way, too. That's interesting. Questions are welcome at the end. But again, if you don't want to wait till the end, you can ask as we go along. So just in case you don't want to forget things, okay? This is an informational session. Caveat, what, another one? Dr. D, yes. This session is a teaching one. It is not legal advice. So I am in no way giving you any type of legal advice. I'm giving you informational advice, okay? Let's start things off where we started, the United States Constitution. That's the place we're going to find the First Amendment. But let's break it down for just a second. We have something in the Constitution called articles. We have something in the Constitution called amendments. Now, I'm going to make you some money today because what I want you to do, I want you to go to your coworkers, fellow students, teachers, business people, significant others, and I want you to bet the money. And I want you to give them 10 to 1 odds because I bet you'll win most of the time. So say to them, look, if I lose, I'll give you $1. If I win, you give me a dime. You're going to have tons of dimes by the time you're done with this day or tomorrow. Ask them if they know the difference between articles and amendments. Unfortunately, we don't teach what used to be called civics anymore. In our history classes, government, civics-like courses, we do not teach about our government, and that's really a shame. So as a result, let's take a look first of all, and do you know the difference between articles and amendments? They're both found in the U.S. Constitution. Well, let's take a look. Articles give the government its power. That's the federal government, because it's the federal United States Constitution, as opposed to the 50 little kingdoms, the 50 states that have their own constitutions, many of them based on the U.S. Constitution back in 1787. The amendments give the people their rights. So articles give the government its power, like what can the president do? What is the Supreme Court? What is Congress? And the amendments, and especially those first 10, give the people their rights. And of course, there are more than 10. The Bill of Rights is the first, sum and substance, 10 rights of the United States Constitution in our amendments. And many people, even today, it's unfortunate, they don't realize that this is called the Bill of Rights. I wonder if people even know what the First Amendment is all about. That's where the dimes come in, right? You're going to be quizzing people, and by the end of this, hopefully, you're going to be a constitutional expert in the First Amendment. So we're going to look today at several questions. What are these civil liberties in the First Amendment? The freedoms we have to think and act without interference or fear of unfair treatment. That's what it's all about. What are our rights in the First Amendment? Where are they? Well, they're in the First Amendment, Dr. D. I know, but specifically, where? And who would potentially be interfering with these rights? Have you ever asked yourself these questions? If you have, you're in the right place. If you haven't, you're in the right place. So let's take a look at the Constitution of the United States. And before we do that and get into it, we're going to take a little quiz. So if you have a piece of paper, please grab one, grab a pen if you have one. I'm going to give you a quiz on what we're going to talk about today and see how well you do as an American. So let's take it. What are your responses? You ready? Here we go. Can you name the specific rights guaranteed by the First Amendment? Take a minute and jot them down, as many as you can. There's more than 4, less than 10. So take a minute and jot down the rights guaranteed in the First Amendment. Some of them you'll get automatically, immediately. Others you might forget, maybe you haven't studied or you haven't taken a look at, and that's our job here. So what are the rights in the First Amendment? There's more than 4, less than 10, less than 8. You can name as many as you can. Okay? You didn't know you're going to be quizzed today. Are there limits on those rights, yes or no? That's an easy question. Are there limits on those rights, yes or no? Can we burn the U.S. flag in protest? Is that legal? Is that lawful under the First Amendment, according to what the Supreme Court tells us? Yes or no? Can we burn the flag? And can I, Dr. Giardellevi, violate your First Amendment rights? Yes or no? And if so, how? So can you name the specific rights guaranteed in the First Amendment? More than 4, less than 8. Are those limited? Are there limitations on those rights in the First Amendment? Can we burn the U.S. flag in protest? Yes or no? And can I, Dr. Giardellevi, can I violate your rights somehow, your First Amendment rights? And if so, how so? Okay, take a few more seconds and see how well you do. We'll put on, let's say, 20 points on each one of those. Or actually 25, I guess, right? We want to make it 100. So we'll make it a 100-point test. We'll give you 25 points for each and every one of those you get right. So let's take a look at the answers. Fact, if you didn't know the answers to those questions, you're not alone. In a recent poll, only 17% of Americans could name all 5 freedoms guaranteed in the First Amendment. Can you believe it? Only 17%. What is that? Like 1 out of, 6? Only 25% of students knew it was legal to burn the flag in protest. So if you said yes, give yourself 25 points. It is perfectly legal to burn the American flag in protest. The First Amendment protects against the government, not people. So if you said that I could violate your First Amendment rights, that's not right. If you said I couldn't, give yourself 25 points. You're well on your way of nailing this test. And let's answer the rest too. Originally, the First Amendment only applied to Congress, only applied to the federal government. But in the 20th century, the Supreme Court held that the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment applies the First Amendment to each state, including local governments. So you are protected against the big bad federal government with the First Amendment, and through the 14th Amendment of the Due Process Clause therein, you're protected in case your state tries to violate your rights. Did you know that? Go home, go to your business, go to school, make some money, make those dimes, because I bet a lot of people didn't know that as well. Here are 45 important words, and James Madison thought that they were just about the most important words. That's why when he wrote the Constitution, did you know James Madison wrote most of it? A lot of people say Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, who wasn't even a president ever, Jefferson. But here, he thought these words were so important that he put them first in the Bill of Rights, hence the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law establishing, one, an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, two, or abridging freedom of speech, three, or of the press, four, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, five, and to petition the government, six, for a redress of grievances. I hope you get all six of them. If not, go make tons of dimes. And say to people, if you can name three or four of them, five of them, six of them, I'll give you $1. Most people can't in America, which it's sad. But Congress can't establish religion or prohibit the free exercise. We'll take a look at that. They can't abridge freedom of speech, and the states can't. We'll take a look at that. Can't shut down the press, the fourth wall, the fourth branch of government, it's been called. It's taken a pretty hard hit lately. Only about maybe 25, 30% of people still have faith in the press. Of course, that's the same amount they have faith in Congress. The right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition your government for a redress of grievances. And there are all of those guarantees in the First Amendment. Well, that's all we have for today. No, we have a lot more. Technically, it's five. I mean, if you count establishment and exercise as one each, but technically there are really five, and there are two clauses of the religion part. You have the religion part, establishment and exercise. So if you want to be technical and say five, you want to say six, it doesn't matter. You have speech, press, assembly, and petition. And let's take a look at each and every one of those. How to remember them? Well, I hope you grasp them, because here's an acronym to assist you in remembering them. Grievances, religion, assembly, speech, and press. And it spells the acronym GRASP. Grievances, religion, assembly, speech, and press. A little learning sidebar there. Grievances, religion, assembly, and speech and press. President Washington said, if freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter. How true. Let's tackle speech. Free speech is the liberty to speak and express one's opinions. It is the right to express ideas, information, opinions with very limited government restrictions. And that is what the Supreme Court has said. We're going to look at what those limitations are, because remember, I had asked in one of my questions, can anybody limit your speech? The answer is yes. The Supreme Court of the United States, the USSC, has come down with rulings over the past decades limiting speech. You cannot do anything you want at any time. To give you an example, we'll get into more. There was a famous case where somebody yelled fire in a crowded theater. They were prosecuted, and they gave a defense as free speech. And the Supreme Court didn't buy it, and they were prosecuted and convicted. because yelling, screaming fire in a crowded theater is not free speech. Child pornography is not free speech. People have tried arguing that. So there are certain things, we're going to look into a lot more here, folks, where free speech has limitations by the government, and the government can put restrictions on free speech. We're going to take a look at those as well. So what types of communication are protected under free speech? Well, like you do every day of the week, face to face, like we're doing right now, internet communication. Art, did you think of art as free speech? Maybe a painting, a drawing, a sketch, a sculpture, a film. Music, music is free speech. And that's why, especially in our society, we got a lot of rap and a lot of music people don't really appreciate, but it's free speech. Clothing, maybe you have some type of shirt or some type of maybe vest or whatever that has something on it. That is your right to speak, and you're doing it with a piece of clothing on you. So as a result, we see there are a lot of different types of free speech items, the types of things that we can engage in regarding communicating our ideas. And there's, for example, a few of them in art form in picture. Clothing, music, art, internet communication, face-to-face, and especially now that we're in the age of the digital world, and now that we're into so much with the internet, with Skype and Zoom and the like, and what we're doing right now, it even behooves us more to understand our freedom of speech rights. Free speech includes the right to criticize public officials, politicians, religious leaders, and public and corporate policies. Without this right, a democratic nation could not survive without free speech. And that is one of the things that Madison took to heart, and again, why he put free speech in the First Amendment, the amendment that is numero uno, prime, number one, the very first one that comes into our Bill of Rights, those 10 amendments that we see in the U.S. Constitution. It includes the following, according to the U.S. Supreme Court: to contribute money under circumstances, certain ones, to political campaigns, to advertise commercial products and professional services, to engage in symbolic speech, burning the flag. And the United States said, U.S. Supreme Court rather, in the form of the USSC, basically stated in one of their opinions, it's okay to do this. And you've seen this in recent news, right? Freedom of speech includes not to speak, the right not to salute the flag. You don't have to. Nobody can make you. That's your free speech right. Almost sounds like free speech in the negative, doesn't it? Of students to wear black armbands to school to protest a war. And in Tinker versus Des Moines, one of the most famous Supreme Court cases you'll study in law school if you go, students do not shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate. The quote right from the 1969 Tinker case. To use certain offensive words and phrases to convey political messages. So sometimes you'll see on maybe bumper stickers, or you'll see on clothing, the F word and other words. Freedom of speech, folks, does not include the following: to incite imminent lawless action. That is the Brandenburg case. And that is a case, if you read that carefully, the U.S. Supreme Court case back in 1969, you cannot start a riot. You cannot say, let's go burn down the State House and let's go, folks, and follow me. You'll be arrested. You cannot incite imminent, right now, coming up, lawless action. You cannot make or distribute obscene materials, the famous Roth case, and later the Miller case, in which a judge of the Supreme Court said, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. I don't know how to define obscenity, but I'll tell you. And certain things can be obscene, and that is not freedom of speech protected. Wait a minute, Dr. D, what about pornographic material? They get around that by saying that they have scripts, if you can believe it, actors. Yeah, they have actual story plots. And as a result, it is not in the definition of obscenity in the Miller case. To burn draft cards as an anti-war protest, and that was the U.S. O'Brien case. The draft card is not your property. It's the property of the federal government. And as a result, you are burning the property of the federal government. And so as a result, you can't do that according to the O'Brien case. So you cannot incite lawlessness, lawless action, imminent. You cannot distribute what is called obscene materials, according to the definition in Roth and Miller, and you can't burn your draft card as an anti-war protest. It does not include the right to permit students to print articles in a school newspaper over the objections of the school administration. If the administration says you can't do it, you can't, because they own the newspaper. Of students to make obscene speeches at a school-sponsored event. Of students to advocate illegal drug use at a school-sponsored event, because most of the time school-sponsored events are put on by the school, taxpayer paid if it's a public school. So these are some of the things that you can't do. What is not free speech? Fighting words, hate crimes, that's something new in our law. Again, inciting a riot or a panic, yelling fire in a crowded theater. Child pornography. And we mentioned before the Miller case, obscenity. These are some things we cannot engage in freely. There will be repercussions. There are limits on speech beside the ones we just mentioned that aren't speech. And as I mentioned to you before, the Supreme Court has come up with some limits. Not Dr. D, I can't do it, but the Supreme Court has. These are referred to as TPM, time, place, and manner. And the Supreme Court has defined these in cases and lets us take a look at them too. So there are limits on your free speech. There could be time limits. Tell you what that is in a minute. There could be place limits. Pretty self-explanatory. We'll talk about those. And there are manner limits. The one thing the Supreme Court, though, has said, they never, ever want to see people impinged upon their rights impinged upon or harmed or hurt based on content. So the Supreme Court has basically drawn the line saying, look, if there's a statute in the state, for example, if let's say it's state X, if the Congress comes up with a statute ABC, it should never, ever interfere or go against content or impinge on content if at all possible. Content is sacrosanct. It is sacred. The time restrictions regulate when individuals can express themselves. At certain times of the day, the government may curtail or prohibit speech to address legitimate societal concerns, such as traffic, congestion, crowd control. So this makes perfect sense. We cannot have you giving a speech downtown with megaphones at 3 a.m. in the morning. People are trying to sleep. We can't have you give a speech downtown during congestion, let's say during 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. when people are trying to get to work. We can't have you do it in front of the fire station, blocking the fire station because a fire could happen. So there are certain things where we have times as well as places and manners where you can't impinge on the government's right to take care of people and to take care of society, such as these legitimate societal concerns. Okay, there are place restrictions. These are where individuals may express themselves. Under the First Amendment, the government may not close traditional public forums, but may place reasonable restrictions on uses of them. So as a result, let's say it is Central Park in New York. They can have maybe the folks of the X group can have maybe a protest, a sit-in. They can have maybe a speech or whatever. However, the government, the state, the city of New York, whatever, can place reasonable restrictions. They can have statute in place. They can have an ordinance in place if it's a local town or city regulation, whereby they can close traditional public forums. Let's say, for example, it's 4th of July. They're having a parade downtown New York. They're having a parade, let's say, at the Capitol building. They're having a parade or a get-together to honor veterans. You can't have your speech that day because we're doing something else. We're closing that traditional forum. Maybe there's a crime scene. Maybe, God forbid, several people have been attacked downtown New York or a certain street. You can't have your speech that day. Sorry, that place. It's not going to be allowed. That's reasonable. So as a result, the government, the state in statutes the Congress and statutes, the government, the local government, the town fathers and mothers, the city council can have ordinances putting reasonable restrictions on the place. Remember, they should leave the content, what you're saying, alone. You mean, Dr. D, I can have my KKK meeting and use the N-word and put Americans down, African Americans? The Supreme Court says that you should not regulate content. We can have our meeting of our Hebrew faith, and we can have prayers for what's going on right now on college campuses. We can do that. Yes, content, fine. And finally, the manner. Manner restrictions regulate the mode of individual expressions. Not every form of expression requires the use of written or spoken words. As you said, Dr. D, right? We can have a shirt. As you said, Dr. D, right? We can have maybe some type of placard, some type of sign. So the limit here on the manner is the way we do it. We can't start a riot. We can't go and start breaking windows and going into businesses and start looting them. Sorry, California, that happened a while back, not to bring politics into it. Some people say that's fine. Some people say it's okay under $1,000, and some people say don't. But you cannot really restrict the manner unless it serves a governmental purpose. Notice how all these time, place, and manner have to serve a legitimate governmental purpose. They can't haphazardly say no speeches in our city from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. That will never be upheld. You can never, ever have a public speech or a get-together or an assembly in the city square. That will never be upheld. It's too restrictive. It has to be reasonable restrictions on time to serve a government interest and society. Reasonable manner and place restrictions to serve a reasonable, legitimate, legal, lawful government interest to protect the society, to protect the people. Okay? Now, let's take a look. The Supreme Court requires the government to provide substantial justification for the interference with the right of free speech when it attempts to regulate the content. Generally, a person cannot be held liable criminally or civilly for anything written or spoken about a person or topic so long it's based on the truth. It's not defamation. It's not slander, oral, libel, written. It's not slander orally. It's not libelous in writing. As long as it's honest opinion, it's truthful, you should be in good shape. You won't be sued. You won't be prosecuted. So you can say virtually anything you want as long as you follow these guidelines. And the government has a double darn hard burden because it has to be a substantial justification for the interference with these rights. And most of the time, the Supreme Court has decided the people speaking win, especially when it has to do with content. Thomas Jefferson said one time, our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and with that, it cannot be limited without being lost. Let's talk about the press. Jefferson emphasized the importance of this freedom when he said, were it left to me to decide whether we should have a government without newspapers or newspapers without a government, I would prefer the latter. So he really thought that this was very, very important to have freedom of the press. And there's the great man, Thomas Jefferson. Freedom of the press. Let's take a look at this because, again, the press right now, the past few years, has been taking a beating. The press in the United States and Congress have only been running approval ratings in like the 20s. And so it's been just about the lowest ever in history. People do not trust the press these days. In 2017, a US-based nonprofit, Freedom House, found that just 13% of the world population enjoy a free press. Can you believe that? So we should be thankful. A media environment where political news coverage is robust and uncensored, and the safety of journalists is guaranteed. The world's worst-rated countries and territories include Azerbaijan, Crimea, Cuba, North Korea, Syria, Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Those are some of the worst. Freedom of the press, what does it cover? Well, it covers the things you think about: books, newspapers, magazines, radio, TV, and of course the internet. Now that we have blogs, now that people like, Joe Rogan has exploded with his type of journalism and his type of reporting, if you want to call it that. Some people call it kind of talking head stuff. Now that we see Fox and CNN and all the big major networks coming along of age, especially the past few years, the last 10, 20 years, and having all of the talking head type people, all of the debate type people, all the different news shows, we see freedom of the press has really expanded. They call the press kind of the fourth wall or the fourth branch of government, even though it's not really part of the government, because the press supposedly is supposed to be that champion, that beacon of watching out for the people. I won't debate you. How does freedom of the press limit the government? Well, the government cannot practice censorship. It cannot ban printed materials or films merely because they contain alarming or offensive ideas, except child pornography. And so I love this little cartoon I found here. The worst part of censorship is they stopped him before he could say it. But the government, again, cannot practice censorship. The press should be allowed to say what they want to say. And of course, within reason, if they're going to do it with time, place, manner, constrictions and all restrictions, they have to follow those. But they should be able to report the news, report opinion. The press, again, is called the fourth branch of government. It helps to keep the other three, the legislative, judicial, and executive, go make your dimes. Do your folks at home or at business or at work know, or at school, that those are the three branches of government: our court system, the judicial, the legislative, right, the lawmakers, and the executive, the president of the United States and the governors. This is kind of called the fourth branch. Without a free press, this would not be possible to run this government, and the democratic conditions which we are used to and enjoy in the United States would not exist. What rights are covered by freedom of assembly? I know we're whizzing through this stuff. We just went through speech and press. Again, we could spend months talking about this stuff, weeks, but I want to give you a little bit of a smattering and overview of all of them. I want to get you thinking more than anything else. I want to educate you a little bit on some things that you didn't know. I want you to make your dimes, but I also want you to maybe think so that you get a little bit of a sense of, hey, maybe I should look more into this stuff. Maybe I should delve more into these rights and freedoms that many times, unfortunately, we take for granted. This protects our freedom of assembly, our rights to gather in groups for any reason, so long as the assemblies are peaceful. They can make rules about when and where, the big bad government, but they cannot ban assembly. We have the right to form and join social clubs, even if they're communist, religious clubs, if they're Catholic, if they're Buddhist, if they're whatever. Political parties, I can be independent, I can be a Democrat, Republican, or not be a member of any party. And I can assemble with people who are like me and people who disagree with me. And labor unions, some of those we don't think about. So we have the right to be in synagogues and mosques and churches. That's assembly. There's our right in the First Amendment. We have a right to be in groups. We have a right to be in clubs and parties of our choosing. Freedom of religion is going to take a little bit more, because here we have a two-pronged sword, as it were. We have the free exercise clause and the establishment clause, and we're going to talk about both of those today. So remember, we looked in the First Amendment, and some people think that it's really 6 branches or 6 parts of it, kind of 6 limbs on a tree. If you want to say 5, and this is a 2-parter, okay, part A, part B. But in the freedom of religion section of the First Amendment, in that area, there are 2 clauses. And clause 1, think of it like I said, a branch or a limb on a tree, is the free exercise clause. And the second clause is the establishment clause. That one's a little bit easier. The government cannot create a religion. So if we had Congress today, the House and the Senate, establish that Catholicism was the national religion, that would be struck down immediately by the Supreme Court of the United States. Somebody would bring a case to the U.S. Supreme Court, and remember, the Supreme Court can't talk unless they're spoken to. So someone would have to bring a case to go all the way up to the USSC, the U.S. Supreme Court, to strike that down, very much like Roe versus Wade was changed recently, right? We had the abortion law, and now the Supreme Court has put that back to the states. By the way, I just mentioned that I celebrated 40 years as an attorney a couple of weeks ago. I was sworn in Massachusetts on the anniversary, the date that, not the exact date and year, but the date that Roe versus Wade was handed down by the Supreme Court. Just a little fact. The government may not favor one religion over another or treat people differently because of their personal beliefs. So as a result, the government cannot give tax breaks to Muslims and hold them back from Catholics. The government cannot give certain jobs to people just because they are of Hindu faith, while the people of Hebrew faith, they won't give them those jobs. They cannot show favoritism. So there's where the government cannot establish or create a religion. They can't give favorable treatment one over the other just because of your personal religious beliefs. Let's talk about the other area or other branch of the section we call religion, and that is the free exercise clause. Some of you have heard this expression. There is a wall of separation. You've heard that expression, right? Well, go make your dimes, because most people cannot tell where this comes from. Ask somebody, some person that you know, where do we get this separation? Where do we get the wall of separation between church and state? They're going to say, oh, it's the U.S. Constitution. Oh, it's in the First Amendment. Well, let's see where it comes from, because most people don't know. They throw this around. Oh, there's a separation between church and state, but they don't know where it comes from. This language, separation, wall between church and state, was written not in the Constitution, not in the Bill of Rights, not even by the Supreme Court. It was in a letter by President Jefferson in 1802, 13 years after the passage of the First Amendment, and it was written to a Danbury, Connecticut Baptist church. Jefferson was not a member of Congress at the time. He had no direct role in crafting the amendment, so no special authority for interpreting it. The phrase wall of separation was not used by Madison or any other advocate of the amendment. Jefferson mentioned there was this separation between church and state, but again, it was in response to a letter written by a Danbury, Connecticut church. Jefferson wrote this letter to assure them that the government would not interfere with their religious rights, not the opposite. But so many people use this language, wall of separation, separation of church and state, as just the opposite, that the church can't get into the government. Religion can't be infused into the government. Jefferson meant the exact opposite. The government won't be infused in your religion. How many people knew that? It was a letter to a Danbury, Connecticut church by President Jefferson back in 1802. So now, why does everybody use this phrase? Well, it came to be in 1947, decades later, in a case called Everson versus Board of Education, where a law clerk found this letter and latched onto it. This is where we get separation of church and state in the 1947 case. And by the way, if you ever want to read U.S. court cases, that 330 U.S. 1, to give you a quick legal research lesson, that means volume 330, beginning on page 1. So if you went to a law library, and most law libraries have all the full books of the United States reports, which contain the U.S. Supreme Court cases, you would go to 328, 329, pull down 330. And you look on page 1, and you'd see beginning the 1947 case, Everson versus Board of Education. Everson's historic statement was by Justice Hugo Black, written by his law clerk. The separation of church and state. Both affirming and dissenting justices were decisive that the Constitution required a sharp separation between government and religion, and their strongly worded opinions paved the way to a series of later court decisions that taken together brought about profound changes in legislation, public education involving religion. And we would see, folks, as decades went by, no more school prayer, no more even a moment of silence, forcing students to salute the flag and the like, taking down the Ten Commandments from schools, taking off of schools God-related stuff. Well, except in God we trust, that's on our coins and everything. And so the government says that's okay because it's everywhere. It's on our bills and on our coins and the like. But notice how all of this came about. Justice Hugo Black's law clerk found the letter, gave it to Justice Black in the opinion, which was the majority court opinion back in 1947 of this Everson case. And that's where we get it. Go home and ask somebody that. Let's talk about freedom of assembly, getting together. What is freedom of assembly? Well, the Supreme Court has expressly recognized there is a right to association and belief implicit in the First, Fifth, and 14th Amendments. Freedom of assembly is recognized as a human right. Did you know this? Under Article 20 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So freedom of assembly keeps the big bad federal government away from you within time, place, and manner restrictions. And the First, Fifth, and 14th Amendment applies it to the states to leave you alone. What would life be without freedom of assembly? People would not be allowed to gather peaceably and peacefully in large groups without permission. People would not be allowed to protest. It would be harder to do so, to protest opinions and other freedoms using them guaranteed in the First Amendment. Like, for example, if you can't assemble, then how can you have a church or a synagogue or a mosque? If you can't assemble, how can we have our speech that I want to give? If I can't assemble with you right now, how can we have this class time that we're having? Assembly is vital. The courts on assembly, well, they've not given strong constitutional protection to associating for purely social or recreational purposes, but instead they reserved heightened protection to association for political activities, labor relations, religious matters, other matters considered to be having highly important similarity, a similarly higher regard of importance. You have been following this story, I'm sure, in the news. And in today's Jerusalem Post, a third Bernard student has been expelled following anti-Israel expulsion protests. And some of you, I'm sure, have been following this. There's been a lot of hoo-ha going on in the news the past couple of weeks. What is happening? Well, some say the protesters, some of them are paid protesters, so-called students. Some protesters have blocked students of the Hebrew faith from attending classes in these institutions. The federal government just today, Donald Trump, tweeted that they're withholding funds and there will be criminal repercussions regarding the federal funding to these institutions and the like on a criminality stand. And I'm sure tonight's meeting of the joint session of Congress, he's going to be addressing this. Let's finish up with petitionings, and then I'll take your questions. Petitioning the government is our final one. So what does freedom of petition allow the citizens to do? Well, in law, we have certain types of petitions. A complaint, for example, is a petition. A petition is an asking. And most of you know what petitions are, like you signed a local petition that you want to remove a city councilwoman or the case. A petition is a right to express your opinion to the government, and it's a formal document. As I said, in law, we use complaints, petitions like those, or you might have a petition to put somebody on a ballot and the like. This is a fundamental right we have under the First Amendment. Petitioning, in a nutshell, is the right to represent and to request to the government without punishment or reprisal. We should be able to ask the government for things. We should be able to contact our state senators and reps and our federal government. We should be able to write them letters and the like. Life without freedom of petition, people could be penalized for their political views and beliefs. Because if you write to the government and the government doesn't like what you're saying, you're put in jail. And many countries do this, right? Iran, Iraq. People would be unable to communicate with their leaders. Oh, I'm a leader in the Senate. I didn't know my state didn't like this. Oh, I am the president of the United States. I didn't realize this was happening because I'm in Washington and I didn't know political views here. So this goes hand in hand with freedom of speech, right? Goes hand in hand with the press because this is the people's right to speak to their leaders. Although we have many individual freedoms and rights, whose rights come first? The rights of the community versus individual freedom. That is the key. That is the debate, ladies and gentlemen. That's what the Supreme Court has spent, decades, hundreds of years explaining in their decisions. They have to decide constitutionally, because they are the arbiters of the Constitution, what comes first, your rights, my rights, individual freedom, or the community. And as a result, we got it, I hope. We have the answers. Dr. D cannot violate your rights. If I try to stop your speech, have me arrested. If I go on your property, sue me for trespassing or call the police and have me arrested for trespass, but I can't touch your First Amendment rights. There are limits on your rights, right? Certain things are freedom of speech rights, freedom of religion, press, assembly, petition, right? Some aren't. Time, place, and manner. And you have a better grasp of the amendment, I hope. So with that, do we have any questions at all? And I'll ask Emily also anything in the chat.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diatalevi. So much to unpack there, and I'm so grateful we'll be able to have the PowerPoint as well too, just in case participants want to be able to refer back to some of the content that was covered today. Right now, feel free to put your questions in the chat if you do have any. Nothing did bubble up in the chat. Of course, you can also put them in the Q&A. So I'm just going to give just another moment or two while people maybe have a couple of ideas that come up. Of course, you can also raise your hand as well too, just in case something has bubbled up. Yes, one question was, if they'll be able to obtain the PowerPoint through email. Just so everyone knows, I will go ahead and send a copy of the recording and also the PowerPoint in PDF form. And I usually get those out about 24 hours after the session. Someone also was just pointing to having seen that tweet this morning from the president, just raising some questions and a lot to talk about for the right to assemble. So appreciated you bringing that content up as well for today.
Yeah, that's going to be debated this week for sure, especially after his address tonight at 9 o'clock. But we're going to hear probably Democrat, Republican, Independent, and everyone you can find. All the networks will definitely have all these folks on tonight and tomorrow to debate that.
Thank you. And Dr. Diatalevi, if something does come up, when I send out the follow-up email for all of our participants, say you do have a question, feel free to reach out to me and I'd be happy to pass it over to Dr. Diatalevi in case there's any follow-up questions that spring up from today's session. So I hope that's okay with you. And I just want to someone had mentioned, what about the calls to shut down town halls? Is that a violation of free speech or free assembly?
Shutting down town halls in what respect? Can you be more specific?
Okay, great question. Let's see.
Just, trying to shut down town halls, for example. When people maybe show up for those meetings, if they're referring to when you have like a city council meeting or a town hall meeting and people start getting rowdy. Yeah, again, if they feel it's a danger to the people, to the select people, selectmen and women, is city council and all, they have the right because, you're kind of there at their good pleasure. And, if they feel that things are getting kind of being incited into violence, everyone's screaming and the like, they can take a break. They can maybe clear the hall, have people come back. So they do have the right. And again, it's that right that we've been saying, the Supreme Court has mentioned, of the society over the person. We want to hear from you, but if you're going to all yell and scream, and if you're going to start threatening, and you're going to just, have like a riot, then, it's gauge the time, place, and manner type stuff come in where the restrictions take over to limit your right over the right of the safety of others, safety of yourself, safety of the council, and so on. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Great question. And again, as I mentioned, if something else does bubble up, but I didn't see anything else come in through the chat or the Q&A. So Dr. Dia-Televi, I just want to thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you for bringing your expertise on this subject matter to our Skill Up series. And hopefully people were able to just, maybe it was reawakening some of your understanding of the First Amendment, or you're able to apply this in your academic setting as well too. So I appreciate everyone on the call. And until the next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Take
Thank you
care.
all very much. Thank you, Emily. Take care.
Bye-bye.